Yo, 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 hello, and welcome back to the Lenko Show, the sports performance podcast where we talk about anything and everything we possibly can related to human performance. Today's topic is leadership, and I'm bringing in someone who I've worked with very closely for a number of years, and he is probably one of the biggest personalities, one of the biggest characters that you will likely come across. He's an absolute class act, and it is Matt Davies speaking about leadership. I'm not even sure if I introduced that in the right way then, but Matt Davies speaking about leadership. And I've also got a surprise little special guest coming in as well. Luke Neal is coming back on the podcast to interrogate Spoonie. So we will inevitably both be diagnosed with ADHD by the end of this. So let's get Luke is waiting in the wings right now. So let's just get stuck into it. Luke, welcome back on the show, man. You all right?
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm looking forward to being a fly on the wall and just interjecting a little bit, see what grains of wisdom we can get from Spoonie, aka Mr. Matthew Davies.
Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about being a fly on the wall. I'm just here to facilitate this today. I thought you were doing all the questioning. I thought the interrogation's on you today, no?
Well, we'll see. We'll see where it goes, I guess.
I was just talking in the intro that Spoonie will inevitably be diagnosed with ADHD by the end of this conversation. What's the likelihood?
Well, I hope that isn't the case, but I get on very well with Spoonie, so there's a chance. But I don't want to solidify the precedent that everyone's got a bit of ADHD because we definitely don't.
But as the kind of person that Spoonie is, and I think this is quite something that's quite actually prominent in the PT world, where the majority of people to do that type of job tend to be more ADHD, like have more ADHD traits.
Potentially, we have. I heard a thing the other day. It's called oppositional defiance disorder, and it's something that's really common with ADHD. And in other words, we just don't like being told what to do. So that's why you'll find, along with obviously our imaginative sides and impulsive sides, we also don't like being told what to do. So it's very common for people with ADHD to be self-employed, which Matthew Davies has done. He's obviously left the corporate world and gone it alone, which I'm really interested to hear about.
Well, that does rebellion from moment one, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, in all aspects. As soon as I might have said this before, but as soon as someone's like, "Oh, this TV program is really good, you should watch it," the amount of times people are like, "Oh, start Game of Thrones, watch Game of Thrones," I'm like, "No, because you've told me to do it."
Seriously, I had this exact same issue. I didn't tune into Game of Thrones. Like, people were talking about it for years. I didn't tune into it until seasons. There were 7 seasons of it, wasn't there?
I think so, something like that.
I think there were 7 seasons. Anyway, like, I didn't tune into it until the penultimate one had finished. So, like, season 6 out of the 7, until season 6 had finished. Then I started watching it, and I wish I never had, because it was such a waste of time, just because that final season finale was a absolute shambles. It was a joke. And as soon as anyone says to me anything now about, oh, you need to watch this, oh, you need to watch Prison Break. No, sorry, go fuck yourself. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. I've been let down before. I'll make up my own mind what I want to watch. Thank you very much.
You sound troubled, Lenny. You've been hurt before. You've been hurt too many times.
Yeah, it stings, that one. It stings.
Oh, yeah. But I was going to say the opposite. I was like, I was probably start watching it and then be telling people, do you know how good Game of Thrones is? And they're like, yeah, I told you 7 years ago. I'm like, yeah, but it's my opinion now. It's more valid.
Anyway, what kind of things are you thinking we asked Matt today? What do you want to go into?
Well, we could look into some controversy surrounding his departure of GB. He was a big part of it for me, potentially a big personality. But obviously he's now left that, so that'll be good to dig into. Whatever his new role with Kilbride Pirates, is it? EKP has taken over?
Yeah. I want to find out what
his tactics for that, what his goals and plans are. That'll be interesting, whether he thinks he's going to take over the Northern Division.
The pressure on that now, he's steering the ship.
Well, exactly, there's a lot of things. Spoonie's got a lot of anecdotes and stories that he tells you of the glory days, so I'm hoping he can relive them and get some power back in the north of the country, well, Scotland.
Yeah, because
not that we're talking down Edinburgh, they're a very good team at the moment.
Tamworth aren't bringing it, are they? So
Well, we was in a rebuild phase, weren't we?
Oh, I thought we were told not to call it a rebuild.
I don't know.
I thought Johnny Weeks did a big post at the start of the year saying it's don't call it a rebuild. So it's like, all right,
Maybe I don't pay attention to a lot of things, but when you lose masterminds and people that are at the top of their game like Jason Scott, Stevie G, things like that, a team's bound to have a different performance.
Yo, I'm here.
What? Oh yeah, there was some guy that kicked for us as well. He left.
Nice one, cheers, mate. Thank you. Very grateful.
Well, I spend more time with you now than I do when we played together, so it's not like you've left my life.
No, I don't think we really actually even spoke to each other when we played together. Normally, I just spent most of my time down at the other
pissed off on the sideline.
Just on my own. Yeah, I just walk around on my own. No one speaks to me.
That's and then we'd all come off after a bad drive. You'd be like, what the fuck was that? Yeah. And you tell the defense off, and I'm like, I don't see you making a tackle.
I don't remember telling the defense off at any point.
Maybe the offense then.
Definitely would have been the offense. But never.
Where's Spoonie at? Based on ADHD's famous time management, he is only 2 minutes late, but this is one strike in the ADHD camp.
Spoonie, welcome to the podcast. Me and Luke were just chatting about why you're late and how you're essentially having to manually boil water in a kettle. And Luke was busy slagging you off. So if you want to start on that and hit back to Luke.
Yeah. Luke was just highlighting the fact that, he was amazed that we have electricity in Scotland, which some people will be offended by, but having spent a large part of the last sort of nearly 20 years coaching and playing American football with people from south of the border, I'm used to this level of abuse. So I'll let it slide.
Well, I know that I also asked you this last week, but purely for the worldwide global purposes, and especially my Latin American audience, please can you say purple burglar alarm?
Yeah, purple burglar alarm. So one of the challenges is that particular. So this is one of my bugbears actually, is that, and I've got lots of them, so we'll get into them a day. Is that as far as the internet is concerned these days, the only accent that exists in Scotland is Glaswegian, right? And Glaswegian people think that they are the entirety of Scotland anyway, so we kind of get used to that up here.
That's the equivalent of Londoners, yeah?
Precisely. So yeah, the West Coasters up here do struggle with that particular phrase. And our mutual friend Triangle, you can ask him, and I'm sure you've already harassed him about it, and he'll be able to make a mess of saying that as well, because he's from that part of the world.
I have indeed asked him about it, and he refused flat out to even attempt it. He just
knows
that he knows would butcher it. Anyway, today we've got you on to primarily talk about leadership. I think Luke's going to ask you some business related stuff as well. So for anyone that's interested in that, definitely worth sticking around if you've managed to hang through mine and Luke's introduction so far. Just talk to us, because it was only recently, a few years back, that you went down your own avenue of running your own business regarding leadership. So what's that journey been like, and how did you kind of fall into that?
Of course. So to give a bit of a kind of potted history, I joined the Royal Bank of Scotland, as it was at the time. It's now NatWest, but I joined RBS as a graduate in 2006, straight from university, and I spent 15 years there. I was 1 month short of my 15-year anniversary, and I did a variety of different things. Worked in HR, worked in frontline branch management, worked in a central office role, but the last 8 years were doing very similar stuff to what I do now. So it was a combination of one-on-one executive coaching, design and delivering training, team development, all that kind of stuff, and we'd done this, and I'd done it in a couple of parts of the business. Well, first in retail banking for a couple of years, from 2013 into 2015. And then from 2015 until I left, I was in a back office part of the business called Services, which is where the payments teams, the data and analytics, technology transformation, innovation solutions, all those teams lived. So I'd done it for quite a long time, and they had a restructure in the bank, and I'd been put at risk of redundancy 3 times in my career, which, to be honest, for the length of time I was there, was actually quite a low number. I once met somebody in the bank that had been put at risk 13 times. So it's kind of the restructure when you're in a big corporate, and I guess that's something that you guys, the lives that you lead in the worlds that you're in, you've never probably experienced that corporate culture, but that's something that happens all the time. They'll have a restructure, centralize a department.
I've just been made redundant.
Have you really?
Yes. So I work for JM Johnson Matthey.
Okay.
but I essentially volunteered for it because I
Yeah.
was sick and tired of working in the corporate world.
Well, it's interesting you say that. So the first two times, once was at the end of, I did 2 graduate schemes bizarrely. Once was at the end of my first graduate scheme. And what I did was I moved on to another graduate scheme, which was kind of unheard of at the time. And then the next time was just before I started coaching. I got put at risk again. And I found the coaching role. And that, to be honest, that completely transformed my career. You know, the first 7 years of my corporate life, I was just kind of coasting along, didn't really know what I wanted to do. Wasn't really, I had some roles that I managed to get my teeth into, but I hadn't really established myself and worked out kind of what I was all about. And then I started coaching, and that was it. And so it came to 2021 in the May time, and we got put at risk of redundancy. They kind of were restructuring our team. And generally what happens in a restructure like that is the restructure creates new roles. So some of them, they'll map people directly over to those roles. Other ones, it's a case of, we've got these roles and you can apply to be considered for them if you want, or you can apply for basically any other open role in the organization, or you can request voluntary redundancy. And if you request VR, you don't always get it. But I was like, I'm at a stage in my career now where I know exactly what I want to do. I know what I'm all about. I've got a skill set that I know would be in demand externally. And bizarrely, I'd been thinking about this previously, and this was in the May time, and back in the February or March, I'd actually set my company up as a limited company, just with a view to kind of having a little side hustle, so that somewhere down the line, if an opportunity came up, I could kind of transition, off the ship and onto the lifeboat. And I think, I just wasn't anticipating that it would happen as quickly as it did. But May came around and they put us at risk, and I was like, for me, it's a no-brainer. I'm just going to take the package and go. And the packages for big organizations like that are pretty good. Most companies will give you 1 week's pay for every year they've been there. At the bank, it was 3.5. So I got 3.5 weeks pay for every year. So because I was 15 years old was the magic number. So I had 14 years service in the end because I fell a month short. But 15 years would have meant I got a full year's pay in hand to leave. And obviously, there's a chunk of that's tax-free and the rest of it's taxed. But it's a good chunk of money to kind of give me almost like a runway on which to build my business. Like, I didn't need to be generating money from day one. I had I think I gave myself about 8 months in theory where I would have kind of been able to pay the bills before I ran out of money. And then it becomes this, like, right now you've got to make it work. Now you've got to take this idea you've got to take your experience, your contacts, and you've really got to get to it. And so September the 9th was my last day, 2021. And I went out and started my own business, and I've never looked back. It's been an amazing experience these first 2 years.
So what made you go into a limited company rather than being a sole trader? Is that largely for reputation-wise when working with corporates?
There's certainly part of that as well. I'll be honest with you, my memory's not very good, but what happened was around that time, I was like, okay, how could I set this up? I could go sole trader, go limited company. I looked at the different options, and I did quite a lot of research. I asked a few people, because there were a number of people, like, doing what I've done is a relatively well-trodden path. So I knew a few people in my organization from kind of over the years who had gone out and done it. And I spoke to them about how they'd done it. And the consensus was, the best way to do it was to set up a limited company. And it's like 12 quid to set up a limited company. So I just did that. And to be honest, I'm really glad I did, because structurally it's worked really well. There's things like, once you get over a certain income threshold, you can kind of register for VAT. So then you can claim VAT back on stuff that you buy. So things like that are quite advantageous. But I can't really remember all the specific details. I just remember that I did my research, and that was the kind of the route that came out as the most advantageous one.
And why?
Let me ask us. You go ahead, Lenny.
Sorry, I was going to say, why leadership in particular? Because obviously, I think your business is Matt Davies Leadership or Matt D Leadership.
Yeah.
Why did you set yourself on that one?
I think because that's what I'm most passionate about, to be honest. Having spent 8 years, so I'd spent time in HR doing various jobs, and one of those jobs was a department that used to be called policy and advice, which was like an HR call center internally. So managers who were having challenges with staff members, or they had a sick staff member or something, would phone up for advice. And I really enjoyed that. It was like proper, it was what felt like proper HR to me. It was the only job I had in those 3 years of HR that kind of felt like what I'd expected HR to be like. And I really enjoyed helping leaders to develop and think about how they approach their teams. And then I got a chance to lead my own teams in the branches, and I really enjoyed that as well. And then when I moved into leadership development and exec coaching in 2013, I was like, this is what I want to be, working side by side with leaders, helping them reflect on their experiences, thinking about the type of leaders they want to be. Because that's probably the first thing I would say about leadership is so many people, and this is not just in business, but in life outside of work, where it might be, leadership in terms of an American football team that we're all familiar with, but it could just be leadership in terms of, how you show up in your community, how you show up in your church, how you show up in your family, leadership as a parent, as a husband, all that stuff. People kind of just fall into it. They, more often than not, they don't sit down and think about the type of leader they want to be, the way they want to approach it. And so for me, helping people to do that, self-reflection and think about these things and sharing models and ideas with them and resources and observing them and giving them feedback and stuff was just what I really loved. So like I say, when I left the bank, for me, it was like I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I knew exactly where I wanted to go and how I wanted to approach it. And that was that.
Was it something you studied yourself, or was it something that you kind of just become fascinated with and read about, learn about, and kind of done more, I'd say, on the job training?
Yeah. So I studied joint honours management studies in computing science back at the University of Glasgow from 2001 to 2005. So I had studied management in that era, but it was much more. It was more management and less leadership at that time. It was much more the technical aspects of operational management and strategic management and stuff. But in my spare time, I read voraciously, and pretty much all I read about is leadership, whether that be through, biographies and autobiographies of people, whether it be through, the kind of more modern stuff that you get, like Daniel Pink's books or Simon Sinek's books, people like that. Those are all the kind of things that I spend my time reading, listening to podcasts, listening to audiobooks when I'm out walking, all that kind of stuff. So I've done a lot of my own research into that type of thing, and it's just, like I say, it's just something that fascinates me. And so for me, it was like the opportunity to do that for a career was just a really nice, a nice one.
I'd say Luke will probably agree with me on this, but you're a very unique person with a very unique style, shall we say? Like what?
I relate to it well.
How would you describe your own style of leadership and why you do things the way that you do them?
So one of the things that I've really cultivated over the years is what's called in coaching a reflective practice. So really stopping and reflecting on, what you've done, why you've done it, the way that you've approached things, where you could have been, more successful, where you perhaps, overachieved, all that kind of stuff. And it's something that I'd always done before I even knew what it was, really. So to really kind of reflecting on why I do things is a big part of kind of my, I suppose, my operating rhythm. And one of the things I was very conscious of early on was like, there are things that you are good at and there are things that you are not good at. And you can always, in the early part of my career, it was always spoken about, you want to work out what you're not good at and really develop those areas to create this sort of balance. And actually, I've realized over the years that, and I'm not a massive fan of Gary Vaynerchuk, but I think he talks about it when he says, take the things you're great at and double down, triple down on them, really kind of put your money behind the things you're good at. And so when it comes to my leadership style, I've recognized very much the things that I excel at. And one of those things is building relationships. And every part of my life where I've had success, whether it be professionally, through American football, through, personal relationships, have all been about that. My ability to engage people, to network with people, to build lasting, deep, meaningful relationships that are based on trust. And so for me, that's kind of the core of it. Like as a leader, it's very much about, people first and process second. So that's kind of at the core of it. I also recognize that, some people are very good, they're very stoic and they're very level. But actually, the thing that kind of separates me from the crowd is like my use of humor. My use of humor is pretty much the currency I use for everything. It's how I used to, attract females back in the day on the limited occasions where that was successful. It's how I make friends. It's how I approach speaking engagements I'm doing. It's how I approach even, facilitating and training design stuff. If I've got an 8-hour training session with someone, I make sure that it's peppered with humor and kind of levitate, keep it engaging and keep it moving. So really, those are probably the two things, is just using, kind of humor and building great relationships and letting people know that they're important to you. And that's kind of at the core of what I do. And then the other part of that is something that's probably reflected in what's called servant leadership. So there's a book that's quite famous on this topic called Turn the Ship Around by David Marquette, which you might have heard of. And if people haven't read it, it's a really good one. It's about, there's actually, I'll save you the cost of a book in about 2 weeks. There's a video on YouTube, which is one of those ones where he's talking and someone's kind of sketching as he talks, that type of thing. So have a look for that one. And it's basically the story of this guy who was a submarine commander in the Navy in the US, and basically he was due to be going off to this really high performing submarine, and he'd done all this research for something like 6 months. He'd prepared for it, and then just before he was due to go, they're like, oh, by the way, you're not going there anymore, you're going to this ship, which is the worst performing ship in the fleet. And he had like a week or 2 weeks to prepare for it. So he recognized that the approach he'd taken in terms of doing all this due diligence and research, he just wasn't going to have time for, so he had to find a different approach. And the thing that he spoke about in servant leadership was really about was having very clear expectations and very clear kind of goals at the top, but delegating the decision making down to where the information lives. So getting people on the ground to take ownership for the decisions they make and to really kind of run with it. And to me, in my leadership style, that's very much how I do it. I give people a lot of trust, I give people a lot of leeway, and I really encourage them to bring the best of themselves, but also I'm there in a sense to support them, to champion them, to pick them up when they're struggling. Sometimes you have to reel them in, you know, and things kind of go a little bit sideways. But my experience in every aspect of my life is that if you treat people like you don't trust them, they'll behave in a way that will make you not trust them. And if you treat people like you do trust them, they'll behave in a way that kind of reinforces that, you know, and that's proved to be right almost every single time.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of the time, people don't want to let people down and encourage them. But I've got a question that's somewhat two-parted, but do you think that being a leader is something that is innate, something that's natural? Because like especially in sport, I feel like the leader chooses itself. Like whether the coach appoints the captain, it doesn't make them the leader. I feel like obviously you're coaching people to be leaders, but I find that it's very much that comes natural to someone and you can sniff it a mile away.
Absolutely. So let me give you an example. So as you guys will know, I stepped down from GB a couple of weeks back, and shortly after that I took on the role of head coach at the East Kilbride Pirates American football team, which is the team that I've been most associated with since 2006. You know, it's a team that's very close to my heart. And one of the first things that I did there, you know, I spent quite a bit of time in the kind of period just before I applied and then in the sort of week afterwards, reaching out to lots of people who'd been involved last year and the year before to kind of understand, okay, you know, because last year was a really tough year for the Pirates. They finished, you know, I think 3-6-1 in the Prem, you know, secured their place for next year, but it just was you know, as a spectator, you could see that there were a lot of challenges that they were facing organizationally, and you know, for the first time in the Pirates' history, you know, we've got a legitimate rival in Scotland. You know, the Pirates have been the best team in Scotland since 1995 when the Glasgow Lions folded, and there's never really been a kind of a sustainable competitor to that until about probably 3 years ago when the Wolves kind of climbed the ladder. And so that's created a situation where historically, if people left the Pirates, they would go to leave the Pirates to play for a team where either they'd been offered the moon on a stick by a head coach that was going to prove to just be, you know, ultimately nonsense, or more often they would leave because, you know, they were told you don't have to pay subs, or you don't have to turn up for training, you can just turn up and you'll play, or that type of thing. And those are historically, and I've always said this, they're not the kind of players I would want to have around anyway. If that's what they're interested in, you know, playing for a team without really contributing, then that's absolutely fine that they go and find their happiness elsewhere. But for the first time, we've had a situation where players who you really would want to keep in terms of their attitude, their effort, their attendance, their ability, have chosen to move to a rival team. And so that kind of created quite a lot of turmoil. But one of the things I recognized from speaking to all these different peoples, you know, I even did like an exit interview with one of the players who had left before I kind of came in, and some of the players who had thought about leaving that I knew were on the fence, and some of the more veteran players, some of the coaches who were staying, some who were leaving. I really spoke to all of them and asked, like, what were you seeing, what were you hearing, what was going on? And one of the things that consistently came up was a lack of leadership. And I recognized that I have leadership qualities that I knew I could bring to the table, but as you guys know, in a team, the head coach is one type of leader, but the leadership really starts within the team. And so what I did was I installed immediately something that I had done when I took over the under-19s back in 2015. And I created what I call a PLG, a player leadership group. And so what I do in this particular iteration, it's slightly different how I did it before structurally, but what I did was I held a Zoom call with the whole team, spent an hour just talking through my vision, my values, the things that really matter to me, set the expectations, set the standards about where we were going to operate. And that gives people the opportunity to opt in or to opt out. If they decide it's not for them, that's fine, but at least they know what they're getting into. And I can then hold people accountable for that as the year goes on. But everybody was really excited, lots of great feedback. But one of the things I said in there was, I want you all to go away, and in your positional groups, I want you to have a vote, however you want to do it, and identify the leader for that positional group for this year and come back to me. So they came back to me. I've got Craig Robertson for the O-line, I've got Rob Hayes for the D-line, I've got, so on and so forth, Ryan Miller for the DB.
But were these people self-appointed? Because I find people that think they should be leaders are often the worst, and some little managers. It's always the people that don't want to be the managers and don't want to tell people what to do that are the ones that should probably be in the position. It's
like Billy Connolly, I think, said, that anyone who wants to be a politician should immediately be barred from doing it. It's that kind of thing, But these were voted within the groups. So the groups themselves kind of had they would typically would get their coach to they would all send their vote to the coach, and the coach would collate it and let me know. So these guys identified themselves, identified leaders within the groups. And then that player leadership group will be the group that I liaise directly with about the direction of the team. So another thing that I do is team captains. Those team captains don't represent me on game day. When those 4 guys go out to do the coin toss at the start of games, they don't represent me. They represent the other 50 guys on the sideline. So why would I be the guy that chooses them? So the player leadership group will choose them. They'll decide for each game who the game day captains are, all that kind of stuff. They'll take more of an active leadership role. And I think that you're absolutely right. To answer the question in a very long and roundabout way, I do believe that there are leadership traits that you can develop, certainly your ability to communicate, your ability to take ownership. And sometimes it's just about being given a license. But there are definitely people who have these things more innately and more naturally, and I think that these are the people who typically will show up in ways that you don't expect. And even in my own playing career, I can remember, having different leaders that I played alongside who were very different. We had Rab Beveridge, left tackle at the time, was one of the best left tackles in the UK, and he was very vocal. He was a very vocal leader. He was your big kind of rah-rah speech guy. But I was playing centre. He's 2 to the left of me. Behind me is Ryan Hunter. And Ryan Hunter's, to this day, still one of my best friends, one of the best athletes ever played in the UK. And he was a phenomenal leader, but he didn't say an awful lot at all. He hardly spoke. He led by example, and he would just go out there and he would put himself on the line for people, and he would bring a level of professionalism and discipline to the team that other people just, had to kind of step up to match. So I recognize there are different leadership types in there, and that's the interesting thing with the PLG is what those players within each group see in the individuals, kind of leads to quite a diverse group of leaders.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Certainly at Tamworth, there was so many different leaders. You've got people like Will Hobbs who play the jester, but when it comes to the game, his immense, his passion for the game it shines through.
Absolutely.
You believe in him, even though he's a complete goofball. You've got Nelson, who will give a rousing speech, give you 3 verses from a Bible, and make you want to charge for a wall. But then also, if you see Nelson when he's on his own and doesn't have to do anything, his dancing, bobbing his head, acting like a complete goofball. So it's definitely like innate things. And I think a lot of it comes from doing what you say you're going to do. Because it's all opinion. People need to trust that what you say is going to happen.
Absolutely.
And I think the one thing that falls down is when people don't follow their actions. Like a lot of it's integrity in leadership.
It's a huge part of it. I mean, ultimately, you got to say what you'll do and do what you say. That's kind of what it really comes down to. Because and that's like going back to the point of people being lured away from the team historically to other teams that perhaps weren't particularly good. There were some really good salesmen in the Scottish game back in those days. People would paint this picture, but the reality is when the players got there, it was inevitable that it doesn't take long before they realise that what they've been sold is not what they've actually got. And that's something I'm a big believer in. I didn't go in saying like we're going to be national championship champions next year, or we're going to be, playing in Brit Bowl next year. I'm very much about setting my expectations on the way we will perform, the way we will behave, the way we will prepare, and knowing and having, evidence from coaching elsewhere and from people kind of seeing this in other teams that by doing those things right, the rewards are going to come, and there's a Bill Walsh book that the scoreboard takes care of itself. And I'm a big believer in that approach. Is if you do the right things, if you have the right habits, then you'll naturally achieve those things. And that's why I don't go in offering people the world. Same as one of the things that was really interesting, because when my appointment as Pirates head coach was announced, there was lots of people were like, "Oh, are you going to go and get those players that have left the team back?" And I was like, yes and no. Like the hope is that players who have left and players who are playing elsewhere will be attracted to come either back to or come to the organization over the years that I'm in charge. But I'm not going to actively hunt these people down and beg them to come back, because they've made a choice to go elsewhere, and that needs to be borne out as either the right decision or the wrong decision for them over the time. And I'd love to have those guys to all turn around and say, "Oh, Spoonie's taken over, we're going to come straight back." But I'm realistic enough to think that there are benefits to them being where they are just now, and they will realize those over time as the right thing or the wrong thing. And I think ultimately my job is to build an environment of the Pirates that is so inclusive and high performing that people just are attracted to it. They want to be a part of it. It's kind of like the situation at GB. Historically there was a kind of it could be a bit tumultuous and a bit shambolic and stuff. And really, when Jason took on the head coaching role and he brought me in as his first hire, and then he brought in Duncan, and we kind of spent a lot of time talking about building something that you don't need to go out and beg people to be a part of. They come to you. Yeah. I think the success of the trial dates that we've had, 2 Decembers ago and last December, and I've seen the numbers coming through for this year's trials, are showing that that's happening. We're building something. I'm no longer a part of it, but I'm still hugely passionate about it, that draws people in.
Yeah, it definitely shows, because even though like the big names are out in Europe might not be there, but the people that are involved day in, day out absolutely love it. Like above and beyond like their club teams, their hearts in it, and everyone that plays. And the only time that you hear kind of bad mouthing is when that people aren't get to the 45. And I think maybe the positional feedback isn't what it is, but obviously with athletes, everyone's got an ego. Everyone thinks they're the best. So that's part and parcel of being a team. So
and that's a real challenge when you're dealing with high-performing athletes, isn't it? Because you've got that balance between that self-confidence and that self-confidence and that belief is a huge part of being a successful person in most fields. But also that then comes up against, why did they pick that wide receiver over me? Like, I'm clearly better than he is, or that defensive end, or that punter or kicker, whatever it might be.
Well.
But that's the challenge for sure. And listen, there are people have had their challenges with the program for sure, and that will always be the case. But I think as long as you can show that consistent growth, and to the point of the guys playing in Europe, that's a really interesting juncture that American football in Europe finds itself at now. Is that right now there's more money floating about in the game than there's ever been in terms of people's ability to go out and play and get paid, because you always had the big leagues in places like Germany and Austria, and then you had, France had that, and there was a little bit of it in Spain, and it was kind of creeping in Eastern Europe. But now with the ELF, it's really kind of opened that up and created a lot more opportunities. And there are players out there who are like, actually, if I play for my country, because it's a physical game, we all know the risk of injuries there. If I play for my country and get injured, suddenly my market value goes to zero, and my ability to sustain, this life of traveling around Europe playing while I'm young enough and fit enough and maybe unattached enough to do it can kind of be in jeopardy. And so we're seeing, not just in the UK, but there are other teams all over Europe that we speak to that are saying we're having the same problem. Like, people don't want to play for, maybe Denmark or France or whatever, because they're risking their ability to get paid to play in these big teams.
I think that's, at the minute, that's just the state of where the national teams are. Like, maybe the national teams are literally a stepping stone to being able to play the professional game, because essentially, like, we don't get paid to play for GB, you don't get paid to play for Denmark, France, Serbia, any of that. It's literally a case of another level on the ladder to get to that. Like, if everyone's goal in American football is to get to the level of playing for a professional contract and playing for a franchise or a team in a stadium week in, week out, like, I think it's essentially, if we can help guys along the way there, that's
absolutely.
Currently, is there not a single international team that does pay or national team that does pay their players? So not even Germany and things like that.
Historically, there were. I remember hearing about France, and they would pay the guys. They would have like a 2-week camp ahead of European, because when they used to do the European Championships as like a solid week where the games would all be played together rather than the way they do it now when it's spread out. There used to be teams like France where they would get the team together for like a 2-week period. They would have a training camp and then they would have the Euros, and the governing body would pay those people's wages effectively, for that period of time where they were missing work, because they had an awful lot of money floating about in the game. But I don't know where these teams are now in terms of their their kind of financial situation, because the France team, for example, that we played in August looked very different from the France teams of old, in that regard. And I think Italy, definitely there was talk about that because they brought over dual passport Italian Americans when they won the European Championships the last time it was run. But again, I don't know if they're still in a position to be able to do that or if it was a one-time deal. And I think with sponsorship money being so tight anyway, if there's an opportunity to sponsor, say, an ELF franchise where you've got this fixed location, fixed product for a period of time, for some big sponsors, that may also be more appealing than sponsoring a national team where the games are really sporadic and everything's very spread out.
True.
Just for anyone out there listening, Manchester Titans are playing in Europe next year. We've got a fixed location, fixed schedule. We can handle some sponsorship if anyone wants to do it.
Absolutely. It's interesting, just to go back to that's a really, Manchester Titans are a really interesting case study, because obviously, I've known you a long time, primarily from when you were at the Phoenix, but I remember playing against the Titans and beating them 100-0.
But they've got very good salesmen now, but they can actually back it up.
The Titans, that's a really interesting point, but the Titans were a team who, they weren't one of these teams that have been, if you were looking in now and you've looked at the last couple of years, you'd think, well, that's the powerhouse team. But actually, these last 2 years are really an anomaly on the long kind of history of the Titans. They've built from the ground up. And one of our biggest rivalries when I was under-19s head coach was with the Titans, and Jonathan Homer, who's now the senior head coach, was the under-19 head coach that I went up against in those years. And, they really did build from having, I think at one point they had 3 youth teams feeding into a junior team, feeding into the adult team. And obviously their recruitment regimen is legendary. The work of Sam Bloomfield as the cover man for the real DM sliding going on behind the scenes. But ultimately they have built something that people want to be a part of, and it almost becomes self-sustaining to that extent. It's like people know that if you're going to play in the Northwest or really kind of North or kind of the northern part of the Midlands, and you want to be playing at the top level in terms of the level of coaching you'll get, the level of competition you'll get, the likelihood of success. There's only one show in town these days, and it just shows what can be done if you kind of take that right approach,
Yeah, I think with regards to that, like just from being with the team this year, you can tell like there's an awful lot that they had to get right way before even getting to the point where they won the national championship for the first time last year, and then to go and do it back to back this year. It's just, you don't fluke it, do you? Like it's not an accident. Like I know Sam speaks about this quite a bit, but he remembers. So like I think it might have even been their first or second year in the Prem before COVID. They went down to London and got their asses kicked.
Yeah, and
it was like, listen, sucks now, but this isn't the goal. This isn't the mission. We're still going. Like we're still
going. It has parallels in. When the Pirates won Division 1 last year, 2022, I went down to watch that game, and I was watching from the stands, and there were 23 guys on the field who had come through our youth and junior program. But that was 13 years in the making. Like, we set up our first youth team in 2010. It took, 12 years at that point it took to get to the place where you had the throughput. And I think it's, these things, they don't come easy. It's like you either... back in the day, we've seen examples in the UK where people just buy in talent. They get a load of money. They get a load of sponsorship. The Coventry Jets are the most obvious example. They got a huge sponsorship deal. They brought the best players from all around the UK in. They paid them. If you ask them, they weren't paid. If you ask anybody else, and also some of them who have admitted, yeah, I was definitely paid. That was just how they did it. And they were very successful for a very short period of time. They were like the firework, They went up, and they went bang, and then they disappeared in the night, and that was it. And their collapse was almost as fast as their rise. But if you want to be sustainable and stay at the top for a long time, the Warriors did it through having, the most successful kind of junior program in the UK for a long period of time. The Titans were consistently competitive in the North at youth and junior, and they've turned that into something really special at senior. Yeah, It's the Blitz are the interesting one. They're kind of the anomaly, actually, because they've got the most successful junior football team in the UK in British history. You know, their record of winning finals is ludicrous over the last 10 or 12 years. And yet it doesn't seem to be translating. There's a bit of a disconnect, I think, between their juniors and their seniors. It's not really translating into success at the senior level. But
how, like, can I just push on that? Like, why do you think there is that disconnect? Because I think obviously with the GB program, and we've got the GB under 19s and like the under 17s as well. Like, I think the ultimate goal is to have that pathway through.
Absolutely.
Why do you think there is a disconnect? And how would you go about fixing that?
Egos. That's why there's a disconnect in all these situations. Ultimately, what happens is people get this idea of my little empire. You know, it's like, even though I'm part of this bigger organization, structurally, this little thing that I own is the most important part of it. And so I'll do things, even if they are not in line with the other group or they're detrimental to the other group, because it benefits me and it makes me look good. When I took over recently at seniors, obviously we've got a youth team, a junior team, and a senior team. And the junior team I was head coach of for 4 years. A number of the coaches who are still there were guys that I brought onto that staff. But I was very clear with Tam, the head coach, and with Amanda, the chairman. I was like, I will not be taking any staff from that under-19 team. Because if I do that, I'm basically shafting myself in terms of my pipeline of talent that's going to come through over the next few years. Like, I need the under-19s and the under-16s to be really solid, to be really well run, really well coached, so that the talent continues to flow through. And I think too often you'll see things like that at club level where they'll kind of pillage resources, whether it be coaching, whether it be money, whether it be kit, whether it be taking the best training facilities, the best training times, you know, and kind of shaft other parts of their own organization to make them look good. In British American football, I have no experience or very limited experience of any other amateur sport in the UK. So I'm not going with comparisons to them. But the level of ego that you see across our sport, considering it is an amateur sport that almost nobody goes to watch, is quite frankly remarkable.
I think because the amateur level is the highest you can get in the UK.
Yeah.
So like your ego can just, I play for the best team. And I'm like, well, yeah,
absolutely.
If you played football, you'd be very much bang average. And I agree with that with myself. Like,
yeah,
if I was as good at football as I was American football, I might be able to play Saturday League or Division Two.
It's crazy, isn't it? That's it.
But
and I think it drives these situations where people do stuff like that, where they will deliberately, it's like, well, you know, what can I learn from them? And you see that at things like the coaches convention. You know, the coaches convention, they bring over these coaches from the States who have got tons of knowledge and experience, and they make themselves totally available all weekend to answer all the stupid little nuanced questions that you develop. The number of people, I could tell you before I go to the coaches convention who's going to be there every year, because it's the same faces. You know, it's a tiny fraction of the sport, and it's a small number. And I get there are some people who will do their own development away from it and stuff, and that's fine. But a lot of people, they have the attitude of, you know, what can these people teach me? What I need to know about American football that I don't already know, kind of thing. And I think that is definitely a challenge. So I think for organizations like the Blitz, and I don't know the inner workings of the Blitz, but there's definitely a bit there about the juniors see themselves as the kind of top of the mountain, and they're more interested in almost developing players to go off and play stateside, for example, than developing players to play through to the senior team. Whereas I think we were always very focused on the fact that while under 16 and under 19 are an end in themselves, like some people that'll be all they ever play, you know, and we want it to be a great experience. We also recognize the value of the pipeline and making sure that it's cohesive. And that's something else that probably fell away a little bit last year at the Pirates that I've really worked to kind of get back in place. You know, I hosted the Youth and Junior Awards a few weeks back, and that's something I've done for years. So I know a lot of the parents there, and I've made it clear that, you know, we're building for the future. We want these kids to come all the way through and feel a part of it and feel included and feel developed. So, yeah, but ego and attitude, it ruins an awful lot of stuff and makes people's lives very, very difficult, you know.
I was going to say, when it comes to leadership, what would you see as the main job as a leader? Like, taking away from like any sort of like pathways and things like that. If you were to just manage a group of people, because I've pretty much written down a couple of things here based on what you said already, but I think the need to create like a level of belief or hope within the team that you're actually going to win. Then you mix that with a level of organization, routine, regiment, discipline. Like, how easy is it to hold all that together? Because I'm thinking here about like what happens when people lose a dressing room. Like, you see it in football all the time. Like when people start teams start failing away and individuals kind of lose interest with management, and you hear people bitching about it behind the backs and things like that. When it comes to doing those things and holding that together, how important is that level of competence and that authority that you kind of have in the role in the first place?
Yeah. So I think to go back to this as a kind of broader approach, I think the first thing is setting the vision. Like, where are we going? Where are we aiming to get to? Because there's a big difference, say, in our sport between performance and participation. I think that's a challenge that the sport still wrestles with. Are we going to be the pub team? In which case, the behaviors that I expect of you, the habits that I expect of you will be very different to if we're going to be up there competing with the Warriors and the Titans and, the Blitz and the Aztecs at the very top of the game. So I think, firstly, setting the vision. This is where we're aiming, but then setting underneath that a level of expectation, that will, because one of my favorite phrases is, do your habits match your expectations? If you tell me that, like, you want to be, like 110 pounds, absolutely shredded, and you never go to the gym and every meal's a Fray Bentos, then you got two choices. You either change your habits or you change your expectations, because those two things are just not compatible. So I think firstly, you want to set that vision so that everybody knows where you're aiming. And then that allows people to opt in or opt out. You either get on the bus because this is where we're going, or actually, I'm not interested in getting to that place. I'm going to step off the bus, and that's fine. People opt out. And then once you've set that kind of vision, it's about identifying the behaviors and the approaches and the kind of operational elements that will be needed to get you to that place. And then the bit that comes after that is holding people accountable. And one of the things
I think is clear expectations and sticking to them.
Absolutely.
As soon as you make an exception for one person,
it's game over. The
superstar
quarterback that doesn't need to show up at practice because he's and I've seen this in business. The very first blog post I think I wrote, because I write a blog post on my website every week, I think the very first one I wrote was called "He's Just Like That," and it's this thing of, you've got this high performance sales team, and there's one guy and he sells 1 million widgets a week. He's way better than anybody else. However, he's a bit of a dick. He treats people really poorly. He's nasty to folk. He's got a massive ego. And then what happened? What was that?
Is he vile?
Yeah. Well, in that sense, what people then do is they'll say, he's just like that. He's just like that. You certainly have to bend your expectations around this guy's behaviors, because we're tolerating the behaviors in order to get that level of output, right? And the same thing goes within a sports team. It's like you say, if you make allowances for the superstar quarterback, he doesn't need to be at practice, he doesn't need to pay subs and that kind of stuff. Suddenly you create a situation where there's us and them. And once you've got that, it's game over. I've seen it happen in teams where players are coming along and they're knocking their pan in every week, and then it comes to game day and some guy they've never even seen is in their starting spot. And that will just ruin a team. So I think one of the things that I've seen most consistently, and I speak to a lot of head coaches because I've presented at the BAFCA convention a lot of times, and because I'm fairly well known around the sport because of that networking thing I spoke about earlier on. A lot of coaches, who are maybe taking over struggling teams, or their team are having a difficult time, will reach out to me and be like, "How would you approach this? And what's your kind of philosophy around these things?" And I always tell them that you've got to set the expert. You have to draw a line in the sand at some point and say, "This is what is expected," and from now on, people will be held accountable to that. And then you have to hold people accountable to it. But too often, people just, I don't want to rock the boat, or I don't want to create a situation where people feel like I'm chasing them off. Well, actually, if setting expectations is chasing people off, they're probably people that you want to chase off.
Yeah.
Like that, and that's the problem, is people are so worried, especially in the sport where we're limited with the participants we have. I don't want to lose anybody. I'd rather have a crap coach that's hardly ever there than not have a coach at all. I'd rather have a player that doesn't pay his subs and only turns up for games than not have a player at all. I'd rather not have a player at all. Like, you need to build a team that's sustainable, and that's not the way to do it. So I think that's it. It's set the vision for what's to come, make it compelling, make it engaging, make it energizing, then set the expectations that are required to meet that vision. What are the kind of goals and the behaviors that will feed those goals, and then hold people accountable. And if you do those things and consistently keep people updated, consistently communicate with people, make yourself available, build those feedback loops that I've talked about with the player leadership group, where they'll be telling me, we don't like this, we're hearing this, and that doesn't always mean I'm going to bend to their will and suddenly change aspects of practice, but you have the chance to feedback and make sure people understand why you do certain things. You know,
that was going to be the next thing I was going to touch on. So like just with regards to the feedback loops as well, like my question on this is, what would you say to people who are on the ground level that are experiencing like the day-to-day grind and typically are the ones who have to deal with the consequences of certain decisions made by leadership? How important is it to essentially, like metaphorically, obviously, push shit uphill? Because I think one of the things I've always thought about is like, if you've got a problem, you do not let that flow downhill. You don't let it pour onto the people like essentially who are below you if there's like some sort of hierarchy or order to it, to the organization. How important is it for the team to be successful to keep pushing shit up the chain to ultimately either get a better understanding as to why or change sort of like the process and move on from there?
Do you not think by letting shit get downhill, people at a lower level can get more involved and then they're bought in kind of thing? Because obviously a lot of the time by culture and everything of the organizations.
Essentially, like by pushing shit downhill, I mean the art of the leader complaining to the people below them. Like if you're
never want to do that as a leader. You never want to complain about your superiors to your team.
Exactly
that sort of thing. What that does is that erodes the belief that those people in your team have in the leadership and in the vision. And naturally, that'll start to manifest itself in the effort they put in, the way they move forward, the way they approach their work. So I think it's really important. And big organizations, they talk about a permafrost layer. So they talk about, you kind of got the leadership that will often have this grand vision of how they want things done. And you've got the people on the ground that do the actual work. But the people in the middle are the ones that get stuck having to translate this often, glorious and sometimes outlandish vision into the realities of the resource that they have available to them, or the quality of that resource, or whatever it might be. And that's where the real challenge comes in. And quite often, they themselves can have their own ideas as how they want things to be done. And so they can be disruptive from the point of view of just stopping that message flowing down and just like, forget that, we're just going to do it this way sort of thing. Or equally, they can be in a situation where the expectations from above are really high and the reality of their ability to deliver those is really low because of what they've got to work with. And so they complain down the way and they really kind of create quite a toxic culture. So I think you're right. The feedback loops are phenomenally important in anything. They have to be in a position where your leadership have to care enough. That's the first thing. That is the first thing about being a good leader, is you have to want to be a good leader. You have to actually approach it as something that's important. And quite often you get these reluctant leaders, people that end up in leadership positions, particularly in big corporates where, we're a group of programmers and, Luke's the best programmer, but he's at the top of the pay scale. We can't pay him anymore. So he gets promoted and he becomes the head of the group of programmers. He's not actually a leader. He doesn't want to be a leader, but we want to keep him. We don't want to lose him. So now what's happened is we've lost our best programmer and we're being led by someone that's a terrible leader. So we've now made the team worse twice in one go. And that's the sort of thing that leads to people being promoted up organizations. And then
that's exactly what I found. We had they flattened the structure at JM. So you had like middle managers and then it was essentially directors, but of global things. But that was similar to me because my manager was really good at his job. He got sent on like a comment to India and did quite well. But then he came back. The previous manager of the team was told to reapply when they flattened the structure. He didn't get the job. So now he's back to a standard chemist. Even though that's what he's good at, he was very toxic about it.
Yeah.
But my manager was, because they flattened the structure, he was so busy just doing yes man stuff in meetings, putting out fires rather than understanding what his team were doing. And there was one thing when I was in appraisal and I was like, I'm really struggling here. Like, I don't know whether I'm any good at the job. I've got like really bad imposter syndrome. Like you don't tell me whether I've done a good job or not. And he was like, well, that's not really my style. Like I've never really thought about it. I was like, I'd really like more feedback, whether it's positive or negative, and encouragement. And then, like, at the end of the meeting, we had backs and forths, and he was at the end of it, he was like, oh, do you know what? Yeah, I'm going to really try this. And if I do, I want you to let me know that whether it's working. And I was like, look in the mirror, mate. You're saying that you're going to go out of your way to do something that you're not used to doing. And you want me to tell you that you're doing a good job. And I was like, do you not just see what I asked you to do? I was like, mate. But yeah,
and I think those things are huge. One of the things I think when people are leading, particularly in first line manager roles and stuff, is recognizing that You want to have a consistency with your leadership. You want to treat people fairly, but that doesn't mean that you manage everyone exactly the same way. I might have people of you in my team whereby, Alex needs a 45-minute one-to-one.
Different strokes for different folks.
And Luke needs a 30 minutes every week, and Claire needs kind of 10 minutes twice a week, whatever it might be. That approach is to bring the best out of you. Like we're in a situation, like you say, look, you're going through a situation in your previous job where you're suffering from imposter syndrome. I need to recognize that and find ways to support you through it. And that might mean I take a different approach to someone, say, like, let's assume Lenny's coming to the end of his career. He's not really looking to advance anymore. It's just because he's just it's facially just going to be old. But like say in a corporate environment, we're working there, you're not necessarily looking to be promoted and grow up the organization. You just want to come in and do a really good job. And so the way I manage you will naturally be a little bit different to someone who's, at an earlier stage of their career or just returning to work from maternity or whatever it is. And I think that's really important, is understanding and meeting people where they are, because the thing with leadership and with being a great leader is there's a continuum that goes from a leader that really desperately cares about their people and wants to give them a great experience to a leader who only cares about themselves, like doesn't give a shit about their team and only cares about how they look good. And actually, no matter where you sit on that scale, and I would hope people were at the kind of more positive end, but no matter where you sit on that scale, developing your people and growing your people and coaching your people and being close to them is going to help you. Because if you really want to give them a great experience, that'll give them a great experience. And if you really want to look good, make them great so they make you look good. Ultimately, when you get to certain levels of organization, you stop actually doing any work. That's a really motivating thing. You just deliver things through others. So your ability to get the most out of those people in a positive way, rather than just by beasting them all the time, because that's fine for a short-term thing, but that will catch up with you pretty quickly. But in being in that situation where you are, you're developing and growing your people, their output will improve and you will look better as a result of it, because
it's like being a coach, though, isn't it?
Exactly. Because
like you're putting the effort in, and the players perform and they go and do great things. You're not necessarily getting any gratification from that, or a lot of publicity potentially in some ways, but you've got to know that what you've input into them has made them better, and you're motivating them to be better.
You don't necessarily get a lot of plaudits, as you say, but the gratification for me is literally the reason I get up in the morning for everything I do in my life, pretty much. That's something else I discovered about myself years ago, is when someone goes on and achieves something, and I know that, my fingerprints are on that to an extent, that's as big a satisfaction as I can get from anything in my life, pretty much. Like that's a huge motivator for me to be someone that supports people in that way. And that's why I do what I do. And that's something that I always encourage people to explore as leaders is, get close to your people and develop them and watch what they achieve and see how it makes you feel. It's kind of like how people say, you get an awful lot more satisfaction giving somebody a present than you do in receiving a present. It's the same thing for me. It's like when I see people go on and achieve great things, and I know that I've had some part to play in it or support them, I don't need anybody to tell me. It's just it's a really lovely feeling, and it really kind of, it drives you on.
Yeah, I think the three of us can all attest to that, because I'm starting a new career in coaching people specifically with ADHD. Lenny's an amazing performance coach and helps me. He's probably part of the reason I made it into Italy. We started working together like a month or two before. One of my criticisms that I was too small, and then we put on 10 kilos before Italy. Is your mic gone off, Lenny? I didn't hear that.
No, I don't know why it sometimes just cuts me out. You did all right. Put some size on, put some slab on. Yeah. But like the way that I see, like, because obviously, again, I suppose if we was to approach this from a leadership perspective, I only see my job as essentially what Spoonie said there, is to essentially just give you the toolkit. Like ultimately, you're the one that's got to go out and execute. You've got to go and do it. I can give you the world's greatest plan, but if the effort level is at 1, then it ain't going to do it's not going to do a single thing for you. It's pointless. Yeah. So, and I think from working with general population and like it's very similar to actually working with athletes in the sense of like you just need to understand why. You just need to understand what's the vision, what's the end goal of the program. Can you what can you actually commit to habits wise, behaviors wise? Like what's going to be consistent? Where's your effort level and energy level going to be on a day-to-day basis? And if you can adhere to it, my job's easy. My job's easy. I literally just not write shit down on paper, but essentially program it in for you and like let you go, wind you up like a little toy, and that's it. And then just tapping in on little bits of motivation. I think when you've got like a highly effective team, I mean, Spooner, you'll be able to kind of touch on this, but once you've got an individual or a team that is actually performing and is actually doing well consistently, the level of involvement for like the leaders is minimal. It's occasionally pushing a couple of buttons and just making sure that shit keeps moving, because the guys on the ground floor are the ones that are going to be dragging it all along. So it's just making sure that they're keeping going.
But you probably see this as because you work with athletes, whereas if you work with general pop, you'd probably have to put a lot more effort into motivating people, which is probably what line managers will see with people that are at a job because it's at a job. Obviously, you work with athletes who are already there. You probably have a shared goal, whereas a lot of people are just going into their 9 to 5 so that they can buy coffee on the weekends and have electricity. So that's where I think leadership, particularly in like jobs, is super important, because you need to motivate people to do things that isn't fun. Office work, and obviously since the rise of capitalism, people having to do the same tasks over and over and over again because it's profitable. It's not anything that humans find enjoyable. So that's where I think the difficulty comes in within corporate leadership.
An interesting story for you. So when I was young, my dad worked offshore. Like so we grew up in the northeast of Scotland. He's originally from down in Shaftesbury, Dorset, but he did his apprenticeship with BA Rolls-Royce, got into the oil industry, and ended up spending his whole career working offshore. Firstly in the North Sea, and then all over the world. You know, over in Australia and China and the States and everywhere. And he was away for half our birthdays, half our Christmases, half New Year's. You know, he missed half of every year pretty much of us growing up. Mm-hmm. But his work and his sacrifice allowed us to have the life that we had, you know. But one of the things that I really noticed early on was how much he loved what he did. There were frustrations with it, like of course there are, and you know, he didn't like being away. But the actual core of his job, he absolutely loved. He loved solving problems. He loved coming up with solutions to really kind of interesting challenges, some challenges that people had never kind of experienced. Towards the end of his career, he did some really interesting stuff that had never been done before. And so they were kind of coming up with really novel solutions, and he absolutely loved that. And I remember when he was still working, because he retired just a few years back, but while he was still working, and I was in the early stages of my career, and I was doing these jobs that, quite frankly, I hated. I just wasn't engaged with. I went through a period where I used to get these headaches every day at 9:30, right behind my right eye. I'd get these headaches consistently. And I was like, I need to go and get my eyes tested. It wasn't that. Got all these extra tests done, got a lumbar puncture done, got got kind of an MRI or a CAT scan. I forget which one it was. And they were like, we can't see anything physically wrong with you. And it was just stress. It was just stress, not necessarily from being overworked, but just from being in a job that I really didn't like. I hated. There was no progress. I couldn't see the point of the stuff I was being asked to do. And I knew I was built for more. And I always had an element of jealousy, I think, with my dad in terms of like, how come he gets this job that he loves? Like he gets to do something that he loves, and I'm stuck with this shit. And then I'd started coaching in 2010, 11 kind of time. So I'd been playing for a handful of years, and I got asked to coach at university, at Napier University in Edinburgh. And I had originally had said, I was like, not interested. I was like, I don't understand why anybody would want to coach. It's like, it's none of the parts of the game I love and all the parts I don't love, right? And I was these two guys who played for the Pirates but also played at Napier were like, oh, come on, you know, we could really do, we need an O-line coach, really struggling. And they harassed me for ages. And eventually I was like, fine, I'll come along and help you out for a few weeks. And I did it, and I immediately fell in love with it. Like, it was just...
How long were you at Napier for?
3 years. I was there from, I think it was the 11, 12, 12, 13, 13, 14 maybe, with the 3 seasons.
That pretty much ties in quite nicely with the rise of the Edinburgh Wolves, doesn't it? So you're the one responsible for that.
No, that they were a bit later than that. They were a bit later. So Napier then went on to set up a youth and junior team, which has certainly helped help the Wolves because they've produced some brilliant talent through there. But doing that, I realized, actually, I fucking love this. Like, I love coaching people. I love being part of people's development. And then when the opportunity came up and this job came up to coach professionally in a kind of an executive coach sense, I saw it. And it was when I was put at risk that second time. And the job that I was applying for was actually a promotion. It wasn't even a sideways move. So I'm at risk of redundancy, applying for a promotion. And I was like, this is the job for me. If I could have written my own job description, it was that one. And I went in and I got offered the job in the interview, which was pretty much unheard of in the bank. That's not how you're supposed to do things.
Yeah.
But the lady was like, you know, it was a lady called Sally. She was like, yeah, when, you know, we want to have you. And so I was like, holy shit. And that was when my whole career changed. So then I found someone I loved. So the reason I tell that story about kind of my dad and then me is because, you know, what you're talking about, Luke, is a real challenge that we face. And I think I'm not the sort of person that says, oh, you know, just go out and do whatever you want to do. You know what I mean? And like everybody just becomes like a baker. You know what I mean? There's like just 5,000 kind of like coffee shops on every street, right? The reality is that there's still got to be some commercial, you know, opportunity there so that you can make a living out of it. But really what people should be doing as they go through their lives, both in terms of their time at school, their time at, you know, higher or further education, if they do that, their time in employment, their time in their hobbies, is you should be making a list, either a physical list or a mental list of, what are the things I really love? You know, working with people versus working alone. Tasks with loads of detail versus tasks with minimal detail, you know, and build this list as you go along. And every time you apply for a job or you change job, you want to be moving more towards the list of things you love and away from the list of things you hate. And I think that's how you should be approaching things so that you develop satisfaction from your work, because there are parts of every job. Like, see, when I have to sit and do my accounts and like go through all the receipts and work out what I've spent all this money on, right? I don't particularly enjoy that. Like, I like it when it's done, but I don't particularly enjoy doing it. But that's just part of the you know, running a business. But the vast majority of stuff I do, I get up and I look at my diary in the morning and think, shit, that's all stuff I love. So build a career, build a life filled with the things that A, you're good at, and B, you love. And if you do that, you become much more satisfied with your life, much more engaged, and from a, you know, from a, I guess, a cynical point of view, much easier to manage. You know, when you're managing people that want to be there, it's a very different experience to managing people that don't, you know.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why I set up my own business and just decided to do things the way I do, because I fucking hate taking instructions.
Yeah.
Like me and Lou were talking just before we came on this podcast, like literally, like if someone says go and you need to do this, I'd be like, no, I'm not. And I'm quite disobedient in the sense of, if I disagree with the way that something should be done, I will do it my way.
Yeah.
I think.
And you've also got absolutely no poker face at all. Like, if you don't agree with the way somebody's approaching something, like, it's very evident from you. You know what I mean? Like, you can see.
I don't know what I'm talking about.
That you're not satisfied. And, you know, I've got a friend actually, Magoo, who stepped down as the head coach of the Pirates. I've known him since before I played football, and he has a business, a really successful events, but particularly wedding business up in Scotland with his ex-wife, Heather. And Heather is one of those people that just kind of fits into your description. I've known Heather for 20 years, and she is someone who would be unemployable. She could not work for anybody else. She's so single-minded and so driven and so contrarian at times that she'd be a nightmare to manage, but she's the perfect person to go and have her own business with Magoo and stuff, you know, and like, because she drives success, she drives results. And I think that's it. It's recognizing those things in yourself. Am I somebody that sits well? My wife works for Barclays nowadays. She worked for RBS for years. Then she was at a company called Jabil, who are like a electronics manufacturing firm. Then she went to Sainsbury's Bank. And then after she'd been at Sainsbury's Bank for a while, she kind of was having some sort of challenges there with leadership and stuff, and felt like she was stagnating. She was looking for a new challenge. And she saw this kind of fintech startup company called Modular, this payment company. And she'd only ever worked in big corporates, and she saw this great opportunity. They were promising the moon on a stick. You'll get to come in and do all these things. And so she applied, she was successful, she went in. And firstly, what they'd offered her, what they told her she would have the ability to influence and to manage, turned out not to be the case at all. But secondly, that startup culture where it's kind of flying by the seat of your pants and everyone's doing everything was just like a disaster for her. You know, she just did not cope at all in that environment. And she lasted, I think, you know, a couple of months and then sacked it and went to Barclays, which is like a classic, super structured corporate environment. Whereas I know quite a lot of other people, guys I know through American football that I'm really close to, guys like, Greg Freeman, Luke Hextall, all these kind of guys who they're exactly the opposite. Like if you put them in a kind of strict corporate environment, they would be kind of stifled. Their whole careers have pretty much been in working in new startups, creative environments, kind of building the track. Yeah, what was that?
It's because they've got ADHD.
Well, there's definitely something to that, and they really flourish in that environment. So it's the same thing as I said before about finding what you love. It's also finding the environments that get the best of you. Thinking about, and this is another thing about leadership that's really important is knowing how you need to be led to be successful. Because if Luke's my boss, it's not on Luke to just come to me and work out how he's going to lead me. It's for me to say, right, what like the way you did with your boss is what I really need is right now. I really need kind of regular feedback to let me know if I'm moving in the right direction, or what I how, like another classic example is, I'm Luke's boss and he does a great piece of work and I pull him up at the kind of corporate sort of annual retreat in front of everybody and there's confetti going off and about how great he is. And actually Luke's someone that's really quite introverted and that's like his idea of a nightmare and it creates like anxiety around him. Actually, how do you like to be rewarded and recognized? A pat on the back, a nice email, tell me to my face I've done a good job. Whereas if it's me and somebody says that, I'm like, there needs to be a ceremony.
Yeah, literally.
I need to be on stage.
I remember I won one of my first bits of business for JM. I won the business for JLR Petrol. So we will be supplying their vehicles up until 2030. It was a £90 million contract that I developed the catalyst for. I got an email saying, well done. And I was like, what?
You're like looking at the bottom of the email, see if there's an attachment with some of that 90
million. I was like, is there
some Bitcoin
like
here?
Is there a thing at the bottom that says, congratulations, well done, here's your 10% cut?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I was like, is there commission?
Thanks for the 90 million quid's worth of business. Good job.
Yeah, high five.
Like, go fuck yourself.
Well done. Congratulations on your first JM.
Well done, congratulations. And we're looking forward to the next 90 million that you bring us, and the 90 million after that, and the 90 million after that.
So this is why I'm unemployable. I would go and set fire to the head office and like that's just like for me that's just I'd be happy to those words. So like I'm glad you were touching on those things because I got written down here like in a couple of questions for you actually. How important is self-awareness and how can people go about developing it? Because I think there's a distinct lack of it in society, day-to-day life, and people not recognizing what they're actually saying when they say it. It's like a lot of the times, one of the most effective questions I ask people is, what do you mean? So how do people develop self-awareness? And then the other side to that, so I had to do, I did a DISC score. And, like when you do the personality. So I did a DISC score years ago when I started out as a PT. And I was doing all this self-development, like self-awareness kind of training and educating myself on how to manage and coach people because I knew all the exercise side of things, but the bit I needed to do was help get buy-in from people. So I was doing all of that.
You did that by being not controversial and malleable. And
this is it. So on my DISC profile, you get two kind of personality scores. One of them is your adaptive personality, and so everything's scored out of 100. I can't remember what each of the sections are, but on the adaptive personality, I was very much level across all four. However, when it came down to like the other personality score, which I think is the one that you would default to,
it's like your underlying one.
Yeah, when you're in a comfortable environment, everything that's going on. So my default underlying traits, out of everything out of 100, don't want to brag about this, but my D was 99 out of 100. So like I think that's more so like your dominance score, isn't it? So like just knowing that and then being able to flip between that and then, if I meet a new client and like, let's say they've got very different political beliefs and, very different ways of going about things, like I can quite easily slip into, oh, well, how do you feel today? Not that like things that aren't really me in terms of going,
Absolutely.
hand on the back and being able to manage people in a way that comes across as very very
supportive and
well, no, because I think I am supportive.
it's like, yeah, it's kind of nurturing almost, isn't it? It's like a softer approach to people in those situations that require it. And that's really, like, if I think about my kind of positional coaching, you know, I've had players like Rab Beveridge I mentioned before, who was a super talented player, and he knew what he was good at, and he just wanted you to pick up on his faults and let him know them. Like, he liked a bit of reassurance, but he's like, I'm trying to be the best. You know, I need you to be like really kind of, well, not harsh with me, but, you know, really kind of pick up the details. Whereas I had other guys on the opposite side of the line who were brand new or who were much less experienced. And with them, it was much more like, if you imagine if you're giving somebody feedback, if you imagine like a pendulum that swings to, you know, kind of critical feedback to like positive feedback, you know, sort of developmental to positive. For him, it would be much more at the developmental end. For them, it would be much more at the positive end, you know, positive reinforcement, because they were at a stage where that was what they needed. You know, they needed that kind of to be uplifted and to feel like they were making progress and stuff. In the same way as, you know, you don't observe somebody doing something. Say you're working with somebody, a new client. On the first day, you don't pick up 500 things they're doing wrong. You know, you pick up a couple of areas to focus on, and then once those are embedded, sometimes that will naturally fix some of the other ones, but then you move on to the next ones and stuff. And that's a really important part. So yeah. But to your questions about self-awareness, how important? It's massively important if you want to be successful. You know, it's really interesting because there are some great case studies of people who get away with absolutely heinous behaviors and who don't seem to have any self-awareness, and who go ahead, you know, someone like Donald Trump or even Steve Jobs to an extent was like that. Those people are singular individuals. You know, they have, for better or worse, they have specific individual talents or traits that separate them from the vast majority of the population. You know, Donald Trump was born into significant wealth. You know, Steve Jobs had a remarkable kind of approach to design. You know, and those people who have got those kind of, there's a great book called The Smartest Guys in the Room about the collapse of Enron, which doesn't sound very interesting, but it's one of the best books you'll ever read. It's phenomenal. And one of the things they talked about was how Enron used to hire people with spikes. So people that were like maybe, you know, almost like off the scale low on a lot of things, but they had one particular skill that they were like the best in the world at. And of course, that meant that they had a lot of people with these really really bad behaviors, people that were almost like sociopathic at times. I mean, it is a wild story, but that was how they did it. They hired people with these huge spikes. And I think if you're somebody who has one of those huge spikes, you can kind of get away with a lot of stuff. Most of us don't. Most of us are good at certain things, and we're maybe really good at certain things, but there are very few of us that are like absolutely off the planet incredible at something in the way that Steve Jobs was with the kind of his approach to design or whatever. And so it's recognizing that if you want to be successful, your ability to work with others and your ability to influence others and to get people on side is going to be absolutely fundamental. And so self-awareness is really at the core of that. You know, how you think you come across versus how you do come across can be quite different. You know, if I think about the early part of my career, one of the reasons I probably struggled, and I didn't make a great transition from the student life to the kind of, you know, young professional life. I still kind of took the same behaviors into that world. I was still kind of quite happy-go-lucky. My humor was still quite self-deprecating. So I remember one really notable example was I worked in this office, and I was in early for these meetings at like 7 o'clock in a different part of the building. So I'd be in there at like 7 o'clock, I'd be having all these meetings, doing all this prep and stuff. They would finish and I would come into the main part of the office at like 10 o'clock. And of course, everyone's been there from just before 9, and they're like, oh, here he goes, the graduate's coming in, you know, part-time hours. And I'm like, you know how it is. I was out in the sesh last night, you know, just kind of playing along with it. Like, I hadn't been out in the sesh last night. The reason I was late is the reason I was coming in late is because I'd already been in for 3 hours by this point. But of course, I played up to that stereotype. And what that did was that kind of damaged my credibility. People actually believed that that was the type of person I was. And so because I liked having fun at work and I liked creating a good environment, people built this image of me as someone that doesn't really take his work that seriously. And my self-awareness wasn't good enough to recognize that. And it wasn't until I really started to get on top of that and manage the way that I showed up in certain situations that my career really started to take off. And so I think, having that self-awareness is massive. How do you develop it? There's a few things. One is feedback, right? You need to have people in your life that give you honest feedback. And one of the things that I can sometimes do as a coach is, say, for example, Lenny, it might be, right, you work in this business, you're looking to develop, right, let's get 5-year peers, 3 people more senior than you and 5 people more junior than you, and 10 people from across the organization that you more broadly deal with, and let you send them an email saying, I'm looking for some feedback. Give me 3 things I do well and 3 things I need to improve on, and send it to Matt. And I'll collate it and anonymize it all, and we'll chat it over. It's almost like doing a 360 feedback type thing, but in quite a sort of unstructured, informal way. And that allows you to actually take a look at where you how you think you show up and how you actually show up, because I do this exercise with leaders when I first start working with them quite often, that I call the 10-year reunion question. So imagine that your team was having a 10-year reunion 10 years from today, and you're driving there and your car breaks down on the way, you don't make it. And it's like, okay, how would those people talk about you as a leader 10 years from now if you weren't there? And how would you like them to talk about you? And that comes back to what I said right at the start of the call about people going into leadership and not really thinking about how they want to be as a leader. And so that gives you an opportunity to say, right, how would I like to show up and how am I showing up? What are the gaps, and then what do I need to do to develop that? Another thing that's really important, I think, for it is having some sort of reflective practice through something like journaling, actually taking time to write down what's going on, what's challenging you, successes you've had, start looking for patterns, looking back over, actually, I feel low when these things happen, I feel really good when these things happen, or these seem to be some recurring challenges I'm having with people. What could be the themes there that are causing those things to happen? And just take time to really reflect on where you are and where you're going. I think if you do some of that stuff, it can be massive.
Yeah, I think some of those things hit home really well, because it's essentially asking a question of, like, how do you want to be seen yourself? Like, how do you want to see yourself? Like,
absolutely,
does your own vision of your own future actually match up with who you want to be as a person? And I think it works on every level. Like, if you were to say to a parent, like, how do you want your kids to speak about you in 20 years' time?
That was the next thing I was going to say. So Harper Alice Davies, here's a little picture of her next to me, right? She is the light of my life. Harper's 8 years old, and she is the most important person or thing in my world, right? And ultimately, her view of what a man is when she gets older, assuming she grows up and she has boyfriends and maybe gets married or whatever, her view and her expectations and her benchmark of men will be me.
That's going to be hard, because she's going to have to find someone in peak.
She's going to have to find someone that's absolutely shredded, crazy athlete. No, but you know what I mean? It's like, so the behaviors that I exhibit when I'm around her, the way I treat her, the way I hold her accountable, the way I challenge her, the way I kind of love and nourish and nurture and care for her. But equally, the way I'm present when she's around. And that is my big problem as a parent, is this thing. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. She's this thing of, like, being present when you're with her. That's the stuff that I have to think about all the time. And I reflect on my role in leadership as a parent and as a husband an awful lot these days. And the husband thing I didn't really do for a long time. I just kind of let things just coast, just go along. And actually, when you're married to somebody, me and Catherine in April, we've been married for 10 years now. We had our 10th anniversary last month we celebrated in Dollywood, Dolly Parton's theme park in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. But in April, we'll have been together for 20 years. Like we were going out for 9.5 years when we got married. And in those 20 years, like, we've both changed a lot. The world has changed. We've both changed professionally, personally, geographically, all these kind of things. And so, you really need to think about how you want to show up in that environment. I know, obviously, for you, Lenny, you're, right at the start of that sort of marriage journey and stuff. But ultimately, it's like anything else. It's something we all have to work at in our relationships, is how do I want to show up in this relationship? And there are times when I look and I think, man, I'm doing a really good job here. I'm being super supportive. I'm right there. I'm right where I need to be. And there's times I look at it and I think, man, this is not what you're here for. Like, you're not showing up for Catherine in a way that she deserves and she needs. And I need to kind of recalibrate and take those opportunities. And I think that's it. Leadership is not just you in the workplace. You know, it's not just you in the sports arena or whatever your hobbies might be, you know, running a choir, being part of a church, you know, running community groups. It's everything. It's every part of your life as you're a leader in, you know, how you raise your kids and how you show up in your relationships. How I am.
Can we just go back to where you're with your daughter? So I know you said you're conscious of how like you encourage and you praise her.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm a few years away from having children, but I see a lot of obviously a lot of children are, you're so cute, you're so pretty, this, that, and the thing, and you reward looks. And how do you kind of go down that route? Because I imagine it can be quite deprecating later in life, or as soon as you lose your looks or those things that do fade. How do you kind of prepare yourself to make her value her personality and other things rather than just physical attributes? Do you make a conscious effort with that, or
massively? And listen, sometimes you do fall into that, like, oh, you look really cute or whatever, you know, and it's like, you have to remind yourself that, you know, looks fade. Those things are not sustainable. You know, it's like being, and, you know, the funny thing is, the world we live in now, you look at influencers, you look at people where, you know, there's a lot of ways in which people can make money just off the back of their looks, which encourages people to prioritize that. But, you know, those things I think will come and go. What I do with Harper is there's a book called Mindset by Carol Dweck, where she talks about a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset, which I'm sure you'll be familiar with. But one of the things that they talk about is, and I do this in American football as well, and actually my coach's handbook that I produce and give to the coaches when they first join the team really kind of emphasize this, is that if you praise somebody for being a great player versus if you praise them for effort and attendance and the things that they can control, one of them creates a fixed mindset, one of them creates a growth mindset. So with Harper, what I do is I praise her for the things that will give her sustainable outcomes and performance in her life. So for example, her effort. Like, one of the things, Harper is not naturally athletic, which is remarkable considering she's got my DNA, you know, I mean, it really is a shock. And some of her friends are really good. So she goes to gymnastics. Last night she was there 6 till 8. She goes to gymnastics, and some of her friends could do cartwheels before they even start gymnastics. She's been there for several months, still can't do a cartwheel yet, right? It's just not something that comes easily to her. But every week when she's there and she's practicing, she's working on it, I really praise that. She swims twice a week. That's something that she's really taken to. You know, when I go and watch her, I saw her a couple of weeks ago on a Saturday morning, and she was doing the backstroke, and I noticed they were kind of doing it in a sort of big rectangle. She was like pulling herself along the side of the pool. Do you know what I mean? And I was like, just letting her know I saw that. And I was like, come on now, what's that going to do? You know, it's going to make me lazy. And, you know, what should you have done? I should have done this right. Let's make sure we do that next time. And so I support and challenge and hold her accountable for the things that she can control, which will have a positive influence on her life. One of the things I talk about all the time is practicing stuff. You know, like whatever you do. And I really emphasize to her, whenever she sees me do something that she says she praises me for, or she really likes, or she sees any sort of success, I always remind her that those successes have come as a result of practice, you know? Yeah. And the same thing goes when our junior team were really successful. We went to, the first year I took over, we went to the national championship game and lost to the Kent Exiles. The next year we came back, and you can see there's a bit of a swagger about the guys that come back the next year. You know, they think like, we just show up and we'll be in the natty this year again, you know? And actually, it doesn't work like that. You know, you have to really reinforce the fact that we got to the national championship game last year because we did all these little things. Our habits were right. We had 75% attendance across the team, across the year at practice. We worked on our fundamentals consistently. We focused on strength and conditioning. We made each other accountable for our behavior. And then you kind of, you use that to reinforce the behaviors that are within your grasp that drive performance. And as a parent, that's something that's really important, because it is tempting to be like, oh, you're really clever, or, oh, you know, like you're really good at maths, right? You're not really good at maths. Some people are naturally more gifted at it, but you want to praise the things they're working on so that they continue to work on. In business, it's the same. You will get more of the things that you recognize and reward. If I reward you for sales, right, you'll find ways to get more sales. And some of those ways might not be particularly ethical.
Yeah, I think, because then you get tied to the outcome as well with that kind of thing. Whereas if you're focused on the journey, as everyone says, it's the journey, not the destination. Absolutely. Then you keep doing it.
Correct. The same way of weightlifting. We've all seen guys who chase the numbers, right?
That's in the gym. That's with me. Like it's a case of you're always self-deprecating because you're never reaching your expectations, rather than just saying, I've gone in, I've worked hard, and it's going to benefit me in the long run that I've gone and done this gym session, where it's really difficult for me to just kind of shut off and not compare myself to everyone else. I'm like, there's people at GB that are absolutely stacked, and I look like a small child compared to them. I need to be lifted more. I need to be doing heavier. But then I'm like, well, I'm trying hard. The results are there. I'm a good teammate, and even though I've been out of the team for basically 6 months, I'm still part of it.
Absolutely. And you still make yourself involved in that way. And, thinking about that, like, we all know there are ways that you can push bigger numbers in the gym, like that's the reality of it. And if any of us were in a situation where we decided we're going to start chasing the numbers, we could all probably quite easily access some shortcuts to that would allow us to do that. But ultimately, that is not a sustainable path to success. And so, thinking about the Pirates again, one of the things I'm really trying to drive is that S&C focus again, because I think it dropped off a little bit last year. And so we've got a great guy that works with the team, and he's really kind of committed. He has his own gym, and he makes himself available and his space available for the team, but they haven't really been using it. And so one of the things I'm like, instead of having a thing where we're like, a few years ago they had this, it's like your combined 1 rep maxes at a certain lift kind of got you into different categories. I'm like, we're not there just now. What we need just now is to focus on getting guys into the gym. Like, let's get guys in the gym for a start. Let's build that habit, because it's kind of like your point earlier on, Lenny. You can have the best gym program. I could like jump on the call after this once we stop recording and say, hit me up with the best gym program, and I get it, and I could stick it on the wall. I'm not going to get any more jacked by having it on the wall. Like, I need to be in the gym doing something to get better. So we build the habits first, and then we refine those habits later. It's about just having a sensible approach to it. So that's how we're kind of looking to develop that.
Yeah, I think that's why the best teams are ones that like hang out with each other as well. They're friends.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that joint camaraderie, even if one person's not that interested in the gym, he'll be interested in hanging out with friends and go to the gym.
So I'll go to the gym, and while I'm in there, I might as well do a couple of exercises and stuff. And and you guys know what it's like as well when you're there, when you're lifting. Like I mentioned Ryan Hunter before, like post kind of playing career for both of us. He was working on he's a plumber, works on kind of new build sites, and he was working on one that wasn't far from where I live. So we'd get up in the morning at like 5:45, we'd go and meet at the gym at 6, and like he's an animal in the gym, but like lifting with him really pushed my attendance, because like I don't want to not get up. Like, I didn't want to get up at 5:45 and go to the gym, especially when it's like snowing outside, but I know he's going to be at the door waiting, so I don't want to let him down. And secondly, when I'm there and he's there, I'm like, you're focused and you push yourself harder because you've got that support. So yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for that camaraderie and the peer pressure that it unintentionally drives.
Yeah, I was just going to go back and touch on, the situation that you said you had with Harper, where I think she's learning to swim, and you were kind of questioning her and asking her about, right, what are you going to do next? I think that's obviously a big part of leadership. And I've figured that out with having the dog and going back to the way that parents handle situations. So as a leader, a big part of it is showing people how to behave in a particular situation, and then also helping along with problem solving, not by solving the problem for them, but kind of guiding them through. So like, what's your thoughts on it? What could you do? And then letting them solve it themselves. Like, that's ultimately coaching. It's developing a person, developing a team. Now, the interesting thing about having, like, obviously me and Fiona, we have very different styles of looking after our dog, shall we say. So she's very much like, he can be in front of the fire, curled up on the sofa, and she'll throw a blanket, fucking duvet on him, cuddle him, kiss him to death. Whereas I'm like, right, come on, get your collar on, we're going out for a run in the mud. Like, it's literally a case of I'll drag him through it, and then she's kind of like the little comforter at the end of the day. But like, having to actually show him and teach him how to do things when he doesn't understand language. I mean, he can pick up words and he knows what I'm saying at times now, but obviously he can't speak back to me. So the only thing that you can do, and I want to ask you, how important is body language and your own physical appearance as a leader? So like, I think I might have said this previously, but if you're a leader and if you're in great shape, I think that's a big factor to start with. Like, if you look after yourself versus like, and you walk into a meeting room and you start speaking, and your posture and your body language is one of like, it's sort of like typical power position, that hits differently to someone that walks into a meeting room struggling to breathe while they talk.
Yeah, for sure.
How important is that kind of the physical aspect and ultimately being able to show people how to behave and how to do things?
Massive. So one of the examples I always use is if you went to see your lawyer and you went in and he was wearing like a Kappa tracksuit and like Air Max 90s and had his feet up on the desk, you'd immediately be like, I'm not sure this is the guy for me, you know, because you have certain expectations in your mind of how these people show up, how they appear, what their office looks like, you know, all that kind of stuff. It all drives an expectation. And ultimately, people don't believe the message unless they believe in the messenger. That's what a lot of this stuff comes down to. So I think there's certain things about the way you carry yourself, the way you show up appearance-wise, how you dress, all that kind of stuff. The physical appearance is a really interesting one because I'm significantly overweight at the moment. And I went through a period about 3 years ago where I lost 5.5 stone in 5 months. Like I went super 100 mile an hour because I've got a very obsessive personality. But sadly, like the firework I described earlier on, that kind of burns out and the obsession moves on to something else. And I allowed myself to put all that weight back on over time. And I know that when I'm in situations where I am in a sort of leadership position, like a GB is a great example. You know, somebody like Eddie Cheadle or Deji or, you know, Stevie G coaching their positions could easily just throw the pads and helmet back on and play the positions. You know, I mean, they still look after themselves in that regard. They've still got that element. I was always like the kind of fat, jolly coach. And it was something that kind of used to frustrate me that I'd kind of allowed it to get back to that stage, because I do think there's a credibility aspect there, and that I think that's the same in business as it is in sport. You know, like if I'm preaching to the team about strength and conditioning and diet, and they're looking at me thinking like, what is this guy on about? You know, like he clearly doesn't do any of those things. There's definitely a credibility thing. So you have to be careful about how you approach those things. But ultimately, for me, what I need to do is lose some weight. You know, that's just the reality of it. I need to get back into the same habits I had before and get to that place. Because I think there's definitely, you know, there's no two ways about it. You kind of want to look the part. You know, you want to look the part and give people that belief.
Yeah. I agree with that, but it's dangerous because there's definitely some people that look the part that don't have a clue. Especially in the fitness space or even in American football, you see people that are absolutely jacked. You find a lot of people that have come from like, I don't know, like rowing or bodybuilding, absolutely jacked, and then they'll tell you, they'll be like, oh yeah, been in sport for a couple of years, and then they look like they know their shit. But in reality, they've not got a clue. And I'm sure like there's plenty of PTs and stuff out there that are blessed genetically with just looking at a weight and they're in amazing shape, and then they think they've got the kind of knowledge and ability to tell people how to live their lives, which
that's exactly it. You look at your online presence. Obviously, I love when you about your videos on the gram, Lenny. But like when people look at you, like if they were watching those videos and you were, you know, showing them like the one where you're kind of doing box jumps and you're showing the hand position and stuff, right? If you're doing that and you can barely get off the ground because you're like 6 stone overweight, no one's going to be like, that's the guy I need to train me. You know, like there's an expectation. If you go to a personal trainer and they're out of shape, you're like, this guy either doesn't know anything or themselves, they don't have the discipline to follow it. And I think that's a big part of it, isn't it? It's like if you have a regimen that means that you're in good shape and you know, take care of yourself, your appearance, like, you know, you're kind of well put together, clothing wise, whatever it might be, there's an element of discipline that is almost subconsciously sending to other people. Like this person, you know, they have a discipline that allows them to do these things. I've got a friend actually who I won't name. We had a really interesting discussion a few years back about how this person, who actually now is a business owner, was like, I would never hire a fat person. And I was like, what? And they're like, wouldn't hire a fat person. If you're fat, you've got no discipline. If you've got no discipline, I don't want you in my business. That kind of thing. You know, this person gave them a sales background and stuff. Now, obviously, that's quite an extreme example, but it's worth reminding ourselves that whether that is a healthy mindset to have or an unhealthy mindset to have, it is a mindset that some people have. Yeah. And if I'm out trying to generate business, trying to win contracts, trying to bring new clients in to do work with, and they have that mindset without me knowing it, turning up looking like this is not going to be a winning formula. So I need to think about that stuff going forward, you know?
Mm-hmm. But it goes back to self-awareness and your perception. Obviously, you've got to be aware of the package that you're delivering.
Absolutely, and that is something
ADHD coach, I can just be an idiot, and people are like, oh yeah, he's definitely got ADHD. He knows all about it.
He's an exemplar. That's yeah, and it's just recognizing some of these things. So yeah, there's a lot to be said for that, I think, and absolutely, and for me, that's probably, from a personal point of view, that's probably my biggest challenge is my weight, and it has been for a long time. Like before I lost that weight, I was overweight for the majority of my adult life, and yeah, I need to build habits that stick a little bit better, because it's kind of all or nothing for me. It's like I've got a really good habit going and it pays off, or I lose that and then it goes south.
You need to find a reason that makes it worthwhile, really, don't you? Because ultimately, a lot of people are, I want to get in shape, but like if it's not your priority, it's not your priority, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's more important things to do with your life: children, wife, job.
Yeah.
If
I always
watching
think,
what you eat is the last thing that you have to think about, then that's fair enough.
sorry to interrupt you there, Luke. I was just going to say, this is one of the things that I have always, it's always the biggest battle with people, like when I was training more Gen Pop clients and like just the general day-to-day population, is that they can be in reasonable health, feel slightly overweight, and there's no major pain source there to necessarily motivate. Like sometimes, like people who've had a heart attack, like it's in them, like they like think, fuck, I cannot go back now.
Yeah, it creates a burning platform for change.
Yeah. It's like, I do not want to die. I want to be here to see my kids. And then it's like, well, if you're kind of in that mid zone, that realm of like, there's no real emotion attached to being in your current physical state, then that's the kind of thing that you first have to work on as a coach and get people to realize, like, look, this is not where I want to fucking be. Mm-hmm. And as soon as you find that trigger for like, well, why don't you want to be here? And they can explain it, they understand it, it gets them moving. And it's hard to actually get that when there's no kind of emotional pain in the first place. So like, I think motivation wise, like people expect kind of someone external to just come in and go, right, bang, there you go, be motivated. Like we'll go onto YouTube, listen to a podcast, bang, go and be motivated. It doesn't always work. And then the discipline has to kick in at some point, but it's how do you get there in the first place? And you have to kind of, we're talking about self-awareness and reflecting on your own thoughts, beliefs, your actions. You have to actually dig down into yourself and figure out what drives you in the first place. Like I've been talking a lot recently about, there's been many things going on social media where people have said stuff to me, and like, they do not realize, they have no idea how much that is actually just pouring petrol on the fire. Like you have got no clue, because I know how to motivate myself. I know how to get myself driven. And I've been through phases where I've been super highly motivated. I've gone into a bit of a comfort zone. I've sat there for a little while. And then I thought, do you know what? Fuck this. Like, let's get back up and go again. And I know how to lift it now. And I understand that. And I think
absolutely that self-awareness is huge for this reason, as well as what we spoke about before, kind of recognizing what it is that drives you and why that is. And I think for me, when I lost all that weight before, I kind of had this recognition that, there's with Harper, there's like, firstly, the role modeling, if you've got overweight parents, you're more likely to be overweight yourself. And secondly, I want to be there when she gets married so I can do her father the bride speech. That's kind of the thing.
No, that's a speech I'd want to be around for.
I want to see that. That needs to be on YouTube. That's got to be uploaded, surely.
Well, I need to get there first, like I say. So that is a big challenge for me. But it's one I need to just embrace and get into.
Yeah, just maybe obviously, if Harper's got a pretty high bar, you're gonna have to be patient as well.
Yeah.
Luke, have you got anything else that you want to ask Spoonie before we go? Because I'm gonna have to shoot off because I've got clients waiting shortly. But
it's I don't know. Is there anything that you miss about employment, about being employed by a company?
Good one. I like that.
The only thing that you miss is, if I'd fallen ill when I worked for the bank, I would have had 5 years worth of pay, and then potentially ill health retirement, or, kind of being kind of given a redundancy package. So there was an element of security financially that existed working in that environment. That's one thing. And so now, being self-employed, what I need to do is every month I need to make how much money I need for that month, plus a little bit more, to kind of build out this runway so that I can create that same sort of security net for myself. With the exception of that, no, I don't. I think one of the things that helped me was because the last 18 months of my employment, I was working through COVID. So I was working from home. I'd kind of been weaned off the office environment before I got to my own employment. So historically I would be in the office every day of the week and I'd have loads of people around, loads of chat and stuff. But by the time I left, I hadn't been in the office for 18 months. So I'd kind of had that taken away anyway, which is really helpful. But no, the variety of the work I do, the variety of clients, the variety of people, the fact I get to set my own agenda. A few weeks ago, there was a school strike. There's been a few of them up here, the kind of either teachers or non-teaching staff on strike. And so Catherine's like, right, we need to speak to my mum about, taking Harper for the day or whatever. And I'm like, I've got nothing in the diary, or I can rearrange some stuff that's in the diary. I'll just spend the day with her. And I took one of her friends and we went into town on the bus and went to one of the art galleries and had a McDonald's and, just doing fun stuff like that. The flexibility you've got is huge. So I wouldn't go back. I mean, who knows in the future somewhere, circumstances may change, but right now I'm exactly where I want to be professionally. So it's really nice.
Yeah, same. Like today, I've got both my nieces round, so I'll spend an hour or two with them while I'm working from home. It's great. Obviously, with little kids, familiarity is a lot.
Massive.
So it goes from when I'd work from home once a week, maybe during the thing, and you go down, they're a bit sheepish, but now they go down, their faces light up, and it makes such a difference. And
absolutely,
now I know that my job is also going to be helping people, and it's problem solving, helping people. I think that's what most people don't realize, that what everyone actually enjoys is helping people or making someone's life better or day better or making them smile. And I think so many people have got that confused in life.
Absolutely. Sounds like a great place to end.
My last question for you, Spoonie. So I think we've got a couple of suggestions already. We've got the smartest guys in the room, mindset from Carol Dweck. We spoke about that. We've got turn the ship around, which I'll post the link. I'll find the video on YouTube so people can just look in the show notes and save themselves a bunch of time. But what are your top book recommendations? If we go for like top 5 top book recommendations / podcast recommendations for people to listen to either. We'll go self-development, not necessarily direct just to leadership, but what would be?
Absolutely. Number one book is 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. He's the OG of this stuff, and there's a reason. There's a reason why that book's still in print. It's phenomenal, and there's something in there for everybody. That's a massive thing. Yeah. Another book is called Drive by Daniel Pink. That's something I would highly recommend everybody reads. It's about, the kind of intrinsic motivation and the pillars of that. So that's something that's well worth a look. I would say a really interesting book actually is Legacy by James Kerr, which you might have read, the one about the All Blacks. Put that on the shelf somewhere as well. That would be 3. I'm trying to think of other books other than the ones that you've already got on that list, because they're pretty good. I would say I mentioned, Mindset by Carl Dweck. That's definitely got to be in there. And then in terms of other podcasts and things I would recommend, I think Tim Ferriss's podcast is phenomenal for meeting really interesting people who are, from all different backgrounds and understanding the kind of way they got to. I think the School of Greatness with Lewis Howes, Howes, is huge as well. That's another great one. And I think, for all he's seems to be somewhat of a polarizing figure, I'm a big listener to the Joe Rogan Experience. And I think, I don't agree with everything he says, and I don't agree with everything his guests say, but I think it's very important, particularly in the climate that we are in nowadays, that we all take the time to read and listen to and engage with ideas that differ from our own, because I think that's becoming a bit of a lost art. It's like you vote for this side and I vote for that side, so we can't be friends, and I just think that's something we all need to get over and recognize that actually, there's more that unites us than divides us, and learning about different approaches and different mindsets. And plus, there's some of them are just like hilarious. Some of the guests he gets on, like Shane Gillis and stuff, are worth listening to just for the nonsense. So it's always good to have a bit of that in life.
I think with Joe Rogan, like one of the things I admire about Joe Rogan most is his ability to just sit there and just be silent and let people speak. Like that is huge.
And his guests highlight that so frequently. Like he had was it Robert Kennedy on, the kind of the political candidate, and he was like, in all of the years I've done this, I've never been given a platform just to sit and talk and share my ideas. And again, I don't believe and agree with everything that Robert Kennedy says, but I find it incredibly interesting to have people like this given a platform and just talk, share what's going on in their lives, what their experiences are, what their views. Sometimes I end up listening and just getting in a total rage at some of the nonsense they spout, but I remind myself that actually that's healthy. It's healthy to explore and examine these things. What is it about what that guy said that annoyed me? Why is it that I feel so differently about it? And what evidence have I got that my approach or belief or mindset is actually, optimal versus theirs? Maybe it's just a prejudice that I'm carrying or a bias that I have that I need to examine. So I think all that stuff's really good.
Yeah, it's very much the opposite to the way that Piers Morgan goes about it with a sledgehammer to just get a soundbite.
He's someone that would benefit from being put in the bin, I think.
Yeah, stick him in a jungle and leave him there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually, I know, like, I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here is on at the minute, and I think Nigel Farage is on there. He's actually coming across quite well. I don't agree with that. I don't like him for a lot of reasons, but like in terms of a person that goes about and functions and does stuff, like I think he's actually coming across quite well. And I watched. You're
going to say the SAS thing with the guy. What's Dominic? Not Dominic Cummings. It was the other one.
Matt Hancock. Yeah, I feel like all politicians should be put through that.
Yeah, I think the challenge is that politicians are specifically trained to be good. Like there was one. I don't watch I haven't watched any of I'm a Celebrity this year, but I did watch a bit of that SAS program because my wife was watching it. With the one where where they're in the room and they're getting interrogated, and he was so good at that. And it was funny because the guys who were watching it on the monitor, the sort of SAS guys, and they were like, you could see how rattled he got them just by his ability. Because naturally, if you're in a senior governmental position like he's been in, you're trained to deal with that sort of press interrogation. And he was so slick, like he was just dodging every single punch, and you could see how rattled they were getting by it. And not somebody that I have a huge admiration for, but in that environment, you're like, man, that's quite impressive to see what they're capable of doing.
I watched that. I thought the opposite. I thought the way that he was kind of speaking, the way that he was handling it, I thought he was going about if that was real life, I thought he would have got the shit kicked out of him.
Yeah, for sure. He knew.
In terms, I know what you're saying. In terms of the answers that he gave and the credibility for his backstory, very, very good, very creative, very clever.
Yeah.
But his general demeanor and his personality, the way that he delivered,
so smug.
He would have got knocked the fuck out
straight
away. Like, it would have been hilarious.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's definitely something there. It's like, how people talk about how the internet's created a situation where people forget that, there was a time when you couldn't just say what you wanted without getting punched in the face. And I think there's a bit of that for sure. He knew that there's like, when you go on these SAS type things, the things that go on in real SAS and special forces training environments, this is a very sanitized version of that, and actually, you wouldn't get away with some of those things, and they know that. But it's their ability to dodge questions and stuff. And I don't think it's a particularly admirable trait, but I think it's it's a skill like any other. And it's like if you admire it, then people like that are very top of the pile.
The last thing that I wanted to ask you before I let you go, because I know that you've given us a lot of time here and really appreciate it. But where can people get in contact with you? Where can people find your blog? Because you're frequently that. Just drop your details in so people can go.
Absolutely. The easiest way. Yeah, I mean, I'm on Instagram, but I don't know how to use it, to be honest. I really need to work on that. That's an area for growth. But the easiest way is mattdaviesleadership.com. So MATT, Davies is DAVIES, and then just leadership.com. And if you do that /blog, you'll find my blog, and I write generally a post a week just about something interesting that I've experienced to do with leadership, or something that's gone in the news, or I'm kind of on a phase just now of writing about things that I experienced on a holiday that we had with the family traveling through the southern states of America last month. So yeah, and if anybody's interested in finding out more, have a look on there, and reach out to me. I'm always interested in meeting new people and seeing where it goes.
Beautiful. Appreciate it. Thank you for coming on, and cheers again for coming on as well, Luke.
Yeah, it's been fun. I appreciate it.
And thank you for the opportunity.
Lots of wisdom.
Uninterrupted Matt Davies. What could be better? And that concludes episode number 79 with Matt Davies. Hopefully you've enjoyed that. Hopefully you've got some pretty good stuff from that episode. I will be back again soon. I've got a few more guests lined up to speak to us about training and various other things coming in on the podcast. So that should be absolutely sick. So make sure you are subscribed. Make sure you follow the podcast on a regular basis. And if you feel like it, if you feel so inclined, please leave us a review. That would be absolutely mint, especially if it's a good review. Although if it's a bad one, I'll just throw it to the pile of motivation and carry on regardless. Anyway, guys, take care of yourselves. That's it from me. Lenko out.